slightly different approach to what I'm going to present today, and I had a real think about what does the science of facilitation and the science of learning look like. So I've got a few formulas that I thought we would run through today to give a little bit of a different take around learning and science, learning and facilitation through a science lens. And I guess that there's a lot of science to learning and development. There's a lot of research that says there is evidence that supports that if you do more of these sorts of things, you will get a better outcome and you will get greater impact. If you do more of these sorts of things, and we'll look at what these sorts of things are, it's going to take you longer, and it'll be harder to get to the outcomes that you want, and therefore it will take you longer to see impact. So I did a little bit of research. I went to Google. And I thought what I would do is just Google science versus art, because it's a debate that has been around forever. Yeah. So I Googled science versus art, and I got 210 million hits in about 0.46 seconds. Yeah. There is an organisation on the website called debate.org. So I thought I'd take a look at debate.org and see whether there was a question around, is science more important than art? And blow me down, there was. And currently, it's standing at 63% of people say, yes, science is more important than art, versus 37% saying no. Yeah? So then I thought I'd do a little bit more of a search and go science versus art, plus I added the words facilitating organisational learning. And I got 43,500,000 hits in 0.79 seconds. So it's an area that a lot of people are interested in, and there's a lot of stuff out there that can feed into your thinking around this, some of which I would argue has more of a research basis than other stuff, yeah? So I guess from a science perspective, yes, there is an art to facilitation. Art and being artistic, though, are different. Yeah? So there is a science to which some people use the word art to describe when actually what they mean is science. Yeah? So I thought I would put up a formula for learning. A formula for learning first. And I'm going to write. Yeah? So here's my formula. And I'll take you through the elements of the formula as we go. So, impact equals coherence over, hopefully I can spell, yeah, over simplicity or simplified versus plus patterns plus filters. So if we take a bit of a brain savvy approach to what does learning look like, then what we're really wanting to get out of learning is this notion of coherence. If you approach things through a coherence lens and you look for impact, because what we want to see is people doing things different as a result of going through the learning and development opportunities that they're experiencing. If you don't see anything different, nothing changes, right? And there is a science to getting that done. So in order for us to get coherence, and coherence is something that from a neuroscience perspective, but actually a learning and development perspective, there's a lot more research coming out about how things need to be coherent in order for a good impact to happen and good outcomes to be achieved. Then the elements that feed into this are, we know that, that old KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, yeah? We need to simplify what we're doing. And importantly, from a science perspective, I would suggest to you we need to simplify, 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 because our worlds are becoming far more noisy and far more busy. And this is definitely an area of focus from a learning and development perspective. How do you get people to be in the room, like genuinely in the room, in the moment, and open to learning? And it's about how do you do things from a science perspective to simplify, allowing them to come into the room, and then creating conditions in the room that make them open for learning. Yeah? And then the learning itself, take it to the level that it needs to be at for people to be able to start with confidence so that they're open to learning. Yeah? Gosh, that went quick. I've got a 5-minute warning. So, and then we go to patterns, right? We are ingrained, we are pattern entrained in the way that we think. So being able to break some of the patterns, being aware that we are pattern entrained and the extent to which we as facilitators are pattern entrained, not the least the people who are coming into the room, is useful. So this notion of conscious, non-conscious, and being able to tap into the non-conscious and aware of the non-conscious, and then work to overlay, if you like, in the conscious space, new learning so that people can then make sense of it. And then filters. We're biased. Right? The reality from a neuroscience perspective is if you have a brain, you're biased. I think there are 150, well, it depends, research. Some research says there's over 200 known biases, other research says about 150. But knowing a bias doesn't mean you can change it. Right? So the science says that, and if you just take one bias, we have 5 times the neural networks for threat than we do reward. Right? So knowing bias, and you can't change the evolutionary underlying of that. What you can do though is look to reduce threat in the way that you set up your facilitation from a content perspective and an environment perspective so that people are more likely to be open and curious and less sent to threat through learning. So that's my formula for learning. Now I thought I'd also put up a formula for facilitation when I find it. Here we go. So, my facilitation formula. Goes a little like this. Impact equals a specified outcome over the nature of the issue times the number of participants. Yeah? So, we need to definitely have purpose and drive to an outcome, because 10 years of doing research in the neuroscience or the neuro-leadership space says to me, and my 10 years of research comes down to 3 words, and the first one here is expectation. You have to be really clear about what you're expecting to drive, and therefore share that with people so they're clear about what they're expected to learn coming out of any work that they do. So what's the outcome that you need to drive to? Purpose, intent, call it what you like, right? What's the outcome that you're driving to? And then the nature of the issue. So what is it that you want people to do? Do you want to upskill them? Do you want to increase their knowledge? Do you want to create an experiential environment for them to learn through so that you're creating case studies? What's the nature of the issue that you're wanting to work through from a facilitation perspective? Because there is a science to how you would then design the session that you are facilitating to. And then the number of participants. If you have a small group of participants or a small number of participants, then you can definitely do some things that will get you an outcome far more quickly. If you have a large number of participants, then there is a science to how you might need smaller numbers to do certain types of interventions or activities or learning, and with larger numbers, how you might do other types of interventions and tools and methods and learning. So for me, if you want to create impact, and I'm using the word impact here, right? I'm using the word impact because often we talk about outcome. And outcome for me is very different to impact. Organisations want to see people thinking and behaving differently, and that's about achieving impact. So I'm very clear that from a science perspective, it is about driving impact as the outcome that we want to see from a learning and development perspective. So in summary, if we want to make sure that we are having learning and facilitation opportunities that are informed by current thinking in the science space, and neuroscience is definitely one of those, 2 key things to take in mind, or to keep in mind. The first is neuroplasticity. Now, neuroplasticity is probably one of the biggest things from a neuroscience perspective that has fed into how we develop learning and development opportunities. The brain is malleable, right? And there is definitely a use it so you don't lose it mentality. So the question is, how do you need to get people to use their brain in your organisation so that they don't lose what the organisation considers is important? And the second one is neurogenesis. Our brains don't age, right? And it very much is that if you keep learning through life, you will keep the brain active through life. So neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, important considerations.
Maybe come back up.
So what was interesting was Belle talked about her model create. She created a model. Right? There's science to creating models and methodologies and frameworks. So that says to me there's a science to art therapy. Learning styles. There's a lot of discussion happening in the neuroscience and actually the leadership space around debunking learning styles. So, this notion of learning styles has fed into a lot of what we do, and certainly across the last 30, 20, it's absolutely informed a lot of what we do and don't do in the facilitation space. It's about activating the whole brain, right? We have an old brain, we have a new brain, and we have different ways to be able to activate old and new. Yeah? We have a predisposition to old brain, so it really is about how do we tap into those emotions and those feelings, and therefore, I think it was mentioned the mood of the room. Well, first of all, people have to be able to read the mood of the room, and I'd suggest there's a science to reading the mood of the room. And then you need to be able to know what to do as a result of that, because simply reading a room doesn't mean you can do anything about it. You've got to be informed to be able to do that. And this notion of engaged participants, right? We all want to have fully engaged participants when we're in the room facilitating, because if they're enjoying it and they know what it is that they're meant to do and there is good content, then they'll walk out of that room being more engaged. Now, I'd suggest to you there's a science to engaging participants from a neuro-leadership perspective. And there's a framework, and let me put up one more, right? So engagement is fed by what we call the AGES model from a neuroscience perspective. The A is about being able to get attention in this busy world. The G is about generating insight. I don't care what method you use to generate insight, but it is about generating insight because you cannot change people's minds, they have to do that themselves. Then it's about tapping into the emotion, right? Because emotions is linked with memory consolidation. So if you want people to remember stuff, then there's got to be an emotional connection to it. And then there's social, right? Social brains, right? Social brains. We've underestimated how social the brains are. So science informs how we do and what we do in the